It was the sound that stopped her. Not the chirping of evening crickets, not the distant hum of traffic, but a raw, broken whimper drifting from the shadows behind the old fence. The little girl had been playing with the edge of her doll's dress, humming to herself, when she heard it, a plea so fragile it almost dissolved into the night air. She froze, clutching her doll tighter, and turned toward the noise. From the darkness emerged a figure, gaunt and trembling, eyes glistening with desperate hunger and fear. It was a mother dog, her ribs showing through her thin fur, her tail low and hesitant, her every step carrying the weight of exhaustion. She stopped a few feet away, ears pressed back, body lowered to the earth, and then something extraordinary happened. The dog bent her head, let out a cry so human it pierced the silence, and nudged forward with her muzzle as if begging. The girl's small heart raced. She looked into those pleading eyes, and even at her age, she understood this was not just a stray. This was a mother who had someone to protect. And in that fragile, trembling moment, one child became the only hope for another. Show your love. Hit like, share, and subscribe for more. The summer night was soft, heavy with the scent of damp grass and honeysuckle drifting through the yard. A little girl sat cross-legged beneath the porch light, her doll balanced clumsily in her lap. She was humming quietly, lost in a world only children understand, a place where dolls can listen and every shadow is alive with secret magic. That was when she heard it. It wasn't the sound of laughter from a neighbor's yard or the creak of the wooden gate in the wind. This was different. A low, broken cry, half whimper, half howl, so raw that it seemed to carry with it a story untold. The little girl froze, tilting her head toward the fence at the edge of the property. Her doll slid from her lap as the sound came again, trembling, desperate. Her bare feet brushed against the cool grass as she stood, heart beating faster now. She crept toward the fence, hands clinging to the worn wooden boards for balance. The porch light didn't stretch this far. Shadows thickened, swallowing the corners of the yard. She squinted, trying to pierce the darkness, and that was when two eyes appeared. They glistened, not with malice, but with something else, something that made her tiny chest ache. A dog emerged, thin and trembling, her ribs pressing sharply against her dull fur. She moved slowly, as though each step carried pain, her head lowered in submission. The girl's first instinct was fear. She'd been told to stay away from stray dogs, but then she saw it, those eyes, wide and wet, carrying not aggression but a plea. The mother dog lowered herself to the ground, chest brushing the earth. She whined again, the sound cracking in the stillness. The girl's breath caught. Somehow she understood this was not just a stray begging for scraps. This was a mother begging for mercy. The girl crouched low, her small fingers curling into the grass, watching carefully. The dog shuffled forward another foot, then stopped, ears pinned back. Her tail didn't wag. It hung limp, too exhausted for hope. Then, in one trembling movement, she nudged her muzzle toward the dark beyond the fence, whining again as if trying to speak. The girl followed the motion with her eyes but saw nothing in the tall weeds. Her pulse raced. Was there something hiding there? She clutched at the hem of her nightdress, torn between curiosity and the warnings her parents had given her countless times. But those eyes children know, things adults often forget. They can see truth without needing words. And in those eyes, the girl saw a story written in hunger and fear, in a love so fierce it pushed the dog beyond pride, beyond instinct, to something like prayer. The girl swallowed hard. "What's wrong?" she whispered, her voice almost lost to the crickets. The dog whimpered in response, standing on shaky legs. She took a step back toward the shadows, then turned, glancing over her shoulder. Her eyes locked on the girl once more, pleading. It was as if she was asking, "Will you follow? Will you help?" The little girl hesitated only a moment longer before she nodded, almost to herself. Her doll lay forgotten in the grass as she pressed her small hands against the fence, searching for the loose board she knew was there. She slipped through, the rough wood scraping her arm. On the other side the world felt different, darker, heavier. The mother dog was waiting. She backed up a few steps into the tall weeds, glancing to make sure the girl followed. The ground was damp, cool against the girl's toes. The air smelled of earth and mildew, a forgotten corner where no one cared to walk. The girl's chest tightened with a mixture of fear and excitement. But she pressed on, trusting the strange, silent language that had already passed between them. As they moved deeper into the shadows, the girl noticed how slowly the dog walked, how every breath seemed a struggle, but still she pressed forward, determined. The girl realized then that this wasn't for herself. The dog was leading her somewhere important. The weeds thinned, and the shape of an abandoned shed rose ahead. Half collapsed, its roof caved in on one side. The dog paused at the doorway, looking back at the girl, eyes glistening even brighter in the dim light. Then, with a low whine, she slipped inside. The girl followed, her breath shallow. Inside, the air was heavy, tinged with rot and dust. The floor creaked under her weight, and then she heard it, a chorus of faint, trembling cries, so small, so fragile, that for a moment she thought it was the wind. But no, the sound came from the corner, from a nest of old rags and straw. Her eyes widened. Tiny shapes moved weakly in the shadows, puppies. 4 of them, so small they could fit in her hands, their fur patchy, their eyes barely open. They whimpered weakly, crawling over each other, searching for warmth, for milk, for life. The girl gasped softly, a hand covering her mouth. She looked at the mother dog, who had lowered herself beside them, curling her thin body around her babies as best she could. The dog's ribs pressed against their tiny forms as she licked them gently, then turned her gaze back to the girl. It was unmistakable now. This was not chance. This was a call. The girl sank to her knees, tears stinging her eyes without fully knowing why. In that broken shed, surrounded by shadows and silence, she felt the enormity of what she had been asked. A dog had begged her, a child, for help, and somehow she knew she was the only one who could save them. The air inside the collapsed shed was heavy, almost suffocating. Dust floated in the faint beam of moonlight that slipped through the holes in the roof. It seemed like a place the world had forgotten, a place no one came to anymore. Yet here, in this forgotten hollow, life was clinging on by a thread. The little girl's knees pressed into the damp earth as she leaned closer to the corner. The puppies were barely moving, their tiny sides heaving with fragile breaths. Their cries were soft, broken. Not the strong yelps of healthy newborns, but the sounds of hunger and weakness. Her throat tightened. She had never seen anything so small, so helpless. The mother dog lowered her head, nudging each pup gently with her nose, encouraging them to nurse. But the milk was gone. The girl could see it in the mother's body, the way her ribs cut sharply through her skin, the way her legs trembled from exhaustion. There was nothing left to give. The girl reached out instinctively, her small hand trembling. She stopped short, remembering her father's warnings about strays. They can bite. They can carry sickness. Don't touch them. But when she looked into the dog's eyes again, the fear melted. Those eyes weren't wild, they were wary, trusting. The dog did not growl. She did not pull away. She simply watched as the girl's fingertips brushed against the coarse fur of her head. The contact was brief but electric. A bridge between 2 beings who had found each other in the quiet ruin of the night. The girl's heart pounded. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to comfort the dog, the puppies, or herself. She studied the shed again. The walls leaned inward, warped from years of rain. A rusted rake leaned in the corner, and a broken jar glittered faintly in the dirt. The nest the dog had made was little more than scraps, an old burlap sack, a strip of fabric, a handful of brittle straw. It wasn't enough. Not for 4 tiny lives. The girl bit her lip. She knew she couldn't carry the puppies alone. She knew she wasn't supposed to leave the house without telling anyone. But here, surrounded by their cries, those rules seemed far away, like things from another world. She pressed her hands against the dirt and stood, her nightdress brushing against her ankles. "Stay here," she said softly, as though the dog could understand. "I'll come back." The mother dog lifted her head, ears twitching at the sound of the girl's voice. For a moment, her body tensed, as though she feared the child might leave and never return. But then, with a slow exhale, she lowered her head again onto her paws, her eyes never leaving the girl. The child ducked out of the shed, pushing through the weeds and slipping back through the loose fence board. The yard looked different now. The porch light, once warm and comforting, felt distant, almost harsh. She hurried across the grass, her mind racing. Inside the house, everything was quiet. The television hummed faintly from the living room, where her father had fallen asleep on the couch. Her mother's sewing kit lay open on the table, a pair of scissors glinting beside it. The girl tiptoed to the kitchen, pulling open cupboards, cereal, rice, jars of pickles. Nothing they could eat. She climbed onto a chair, fingers stretching for the shelf above the stove. Finally, her hand closed around it, a bag of bread. She clutched it to her chest, then slid down, her bare feet thumping softly against the linoleum. She knew it wasn't enough. Bread wasn't what puppies needed, but it was something. And right now, something was all she had. Her small hands trembled as she tore open the bag, cramming a few slices into her pocket. She grabbed an old bowl from the sink and filled it with water, careful not to spill too much as she carried it outside. The night air felt colder now, the grass slick beneath her feet. The dog was waiting just beyond the fence, her body tense but her eyes brightening at the sight of the girl. The child knelt, sliding the bowl through the weeds. The dog lapped at it desperately, water splashing onto the dirt. Then, with a glance toward the shed, she turned back and nosed at the girl's pocket, sniffing the bread. The girl smiled faintly, though her chest ached. She pulled the slices free, crumbling them into small pieces. The dog ate quickly. Not with the ravenous bite of a starving animal, but with the measured urgency of a mother who knew she couldn't fail her children. When the bread was gone, she licked her lips, then nudged the girl's hand with her wet nose. The child laughed softly, though the sound was tinged with tears. "You're welcome," she whispered. Together, they returned to the shed. The puppies stirred weakly at the sound of their mother's paws, their cries lifting faintly into the air. The girl set the last piece of bread down beside the nest, though the mother ignored it now. Her focus was on her children, curling her body protectively around them again. The girl watched, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. 1,000 questions spun in her mind. Where had the dog come from? How long had they been here? Would they survive until morning? Her eyelids grew heavy, but she fought the pull of sleep. She didn't want to leave them alone. Not yet. She wanted to make sure they were still breathing, still fighting. For the first time, she felt the weight of responsibility. Something bigger than her dollhouse, bigger than bedtime stories. These lives depended on her now. The night deepened, the crickets fading into silence. The girl pressed her cheek against her knees, staring at the fragile family nestled in shadows. She whispered a promise into the darkness, a vow only the stars and the wary dog could hear. "I'll take care of you, I swear." And in that moment the shed, broken, forgotten, crumbling, became something else entirely. It became a sanctuary, a place where hope, against all odds, had begun to grow. Morning broke with a pale wash of gold over the town, but inside the girl's chest, the night still lingered. She stirred beneath her quilt, her ears tuned not to the familiar sounds of the house, the rattle of the kettle, the shuffle of her father's boots, but to the silence outside. She wanted to hear a bark, a whimper, some proof that the family in the shed had survived until dawn. She sat up quickly, hair tangled across her face, and slipped into yesterday's dress. Every step creaked the wooden floorboards, but her parents were still asleep, worn out from another late night argument about bills. Their voices had been sharp, brittle, words tossed like broken glass across the kitchen. The girl had learned to move quietly around those edges, to keep her secrets tucked away, where they couldn't be broken. Outside, the grass glittered with dew. She darted across the yard, heart hammering, and pushed through the fence board. The shed was waiting, sagging against the morning light but alive. She froze in the doorway, relief flooding through her. The mother dog's head lifted, ears twitching. The puppies stirred, their tiny mouths seeking her warmth. "You made it," the girl whispered, kneeling down. She pulled 2 more slices of bread from her pocket, stolen that morning while her mother measured coffee into the tin. She had carried them in her school satchel, hidden beneath her pencil case, careful not to crumble them. The mother dog ate slowly this time, chewing with tired gratitude. The girl stroked her head, brushing dirt from her fur. "I'll bring better food. I promise," she murmured, though she wasn't sure how. At school, the secret pressed heavy against her chest. While the teacher's voice droned on about multiplication, the girl's mind was outside, with the shed. She scribbled notes in the margins of her notebook, tiny sketches of a dog's ears, of puppies curled together. She didn't tell anyone. Not her friends at recess. Not the lunch lady when she slipped part of her sandwich into her pocket. Secrets had power. She felt it now. The way her whole world seemed different because of what only she knew. But secrets also had weight. Every time she saw her father's brow furrow at the empty bread bag, or her mother shake her head at the dwindling groceries, guilt twisted inside her. That night she returned again. This time she brought not just bread, but the half sandwich she had saved. Peanut butter clung to the crust, sticky and sweet. She laid it gently near the mother dog, who sniffed it curiously before eating. The girl giggled when the dog licked her fingers clean. It was a sound she hadn't heard from herself in weeks. A laugh that didn't feel forced. The puppies shifted in their nest, one letting out a tiny squeak. She leaned closer, brushing a fingertip across their downy fur. They were warmer now, stronger. Days passed in this rhythm. School chores, quick meals with her family, and always, when she could, slipping through the fence to the shed. Sometimes she smuggled scraps of chicken skin or cold noodles. Other times just bread and water. Each time the mother dog's eyes met hers with quiet gratitude, a bond deepening in the unspoken space between them. But secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of spilling. It happened on a Thursday, when her father went looking for his missing hammer. He stomped across the yard, muttering under his breath, and shoved the loose fence board aside. The girl heard his voice through the kitchen window, sharp with surprise. What the? She dropped her spoon into her cereal, heart freezing. By the time she ran outside, he was already at the shed, staring inside. The mother dog bristled, ears pinned, body shielding her puppies. Her father cursed under his breath. Stray mutt. Damn things hiding here. He reached for the rake leaning against the fence. No. The girl's cry tore out before she could stop it. She threw herself in front of him, arms spread wide. Don't hurt her. Her father's eyes narrowed. You knew about this? His voice was low, dangerous. Tears burned her eyes.
She's not bad. She's just hungry.
She has babies. She pointed desperately toward the nest. Please, Daddy. Don't make them go. The rake hung in his grip, uncertain now. He looked into the shed again at the trembling puppies, at the gaunt mother whose body quivered but who did not bare her teeth. Something in his expression softened, though his jaw stayed hard. We don't have food for us, let alone them, he muttered. The girl's small hands clenched into fists. I'll share mine. I'll take care of them. Her voice broke, but she held his gaze. Please. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, he lowered the rake. He scrubbed a hand across his face, sighing. You're just like your mother, he said softly, almost bitterly. Then, louder, fine. But if they get sick or bite you, they're gone. Understand? The girl nodded furiously, relief flooding her. That night, she crept back to the shed with an extra blanket she had stolen from her bed. She laid it over the straw, tucking it carefully around the puppies. The mother dog licked her hand once, as if sealing a pact. The girl whispered, They'll never take you away. Not while I'm here. And in the stillness of that moment, with the crickets singing and the night air cool around them, she felt something shift inside her, a courage she hadn't known she carried. The secret was no longer just hers. It was a promise. The first frost came sooner than anyone expected. One morning the girl stepped out and saw her breath floating in pale clouds. The garden had turned brittle overnight, stalks stiff and frosted white. Winter was creeping in, quiet but merciless, and the shed felt colder than ever. She rushed across the yard, carrying the bowl of soup she had begged from her mother's pot. Inside the shed, the air was raw, her fingers stinging as she reached for the mother dog. The blanket she had left was damp now, pressed thin by tiny bodies huddled together. The puppies whimpered in their sleep, curling against each other, noses tucked under their mother's fur. The girl knelt and set the bowl down carefully. Steam rose, filling the air with the scent of carrots and broth. The mother dog lifted her wary head, eyes glassy, and sniffed. Her ribs still showed through her coat, but there was a fire in her gaze now, a fight she hadn't had before. She lapped at the soup, then nudged her babies closer, as if showing them, "See, she hasn't forgotten us." But the girl's heart ached. She could feel the cold gnawing at her bones, and she knew the shed wouldn't keep them safe much longer. The cracks in the wood let in sharp air that cut across her face. She pressed her hands into the straw, whispering, "Just hold on. I'll find a way." At school, she couldn't focus. She doodled firewood in the margins of her math homework, planned ways to sneak extra food. When her friends talked about Christmas dresses and snow games, she thought only of puppies shivering in the shed. She had never carried a burden so heavy, and yet it made her feel older, stronger. One afternoon, the sky darkened early, clouds heavy with snow. Her father's voice thundered across the house. "Where's all the soup gone? We barely have enough for us, and it disappears." His glare fell on her and she froze. She wanted to speak, to tell the truth, but her throat closed. Her mother glanced between them, eyes tired, and said nothing. Silence weighed thicker than the storm pressing at the windows. That night the first flakes fell, spinning slow and silent. The girl watched from her bedroom window, blanket clutched tight. She could hear the puppies in her head, crying out, their tiny bodies no match for the snow. She waited until her parents' footsteps grew still, then crept out into the cold. The world was white and hushed, the crunch of her boots the only sound. She carried another blanket, heavier this time, and a jar of leftover rice. The shed door groaned when she pushed it open. But the warmth that surged inside was immediate, not from the air, but from the way the mother dog wagged her tail faintly, eyes alight. The girl wrapped the blanket tighter around the puppies, tucking them into the curve of their mother's body. She sat there too, her own breath clouding the air, feeding them spoonfuls of rice as though it were a feast. "We're going to make it," she whispered. "All of us." But making it would not be easy. The next week was a test of endurance. Food ran thinner in the house, her father grumbling louder at every empty shelf. The girl grew braver in her thefts, slipping chicken bones into her pockets, hiding scraps under her shirt. Every meal she sacrificed, her belly aching, but she carried her hunger to the shed and found joy in watching the puppies eat instead. One night, though, she found the mother dog struggling to stand. Her legs trembled, her breaths shallow. Panic rushed through the girl like fire. She pressed her hands against the dog's chest, desperate to feel its rhythm. "Please, please don't leave them," she begged, tears falling hot onto her cold hands. The mother dog's eyes met hers, ancient, pained, but filled with trust. And in that gaze, the girl knew she couldn't do this alone anymore. The next morning, she did something she had never dared. She cornered her mother in the kitchen while her father was away. Her voice was small but steady. "Mama, there's a dog. She has puppies." In the shed, her mother's spoon froze over the pot. Slowly, she turned. "What did you say?" The girl's throat wavered, but she pressed on. "I've been feeding them. They'll die if I don't. Please don't be mad." Silence filled the room, broken only by the bubbling pot. Then her mother sighed, long and heavy, setting the spoon down. She rubbed her eyes, looking suddenly older, softer. "I knew something was missing. I prayed it wasn't rats." The girl blinked back tears. "Please, Mama. Just come see." Her mother hesitated, then nodded. Together, they crossed the yard, snow crunching underfoot. When they entered the shed, the puppies stirred, squeaking at the scent of strangers. The mother dog lifted her head weakly, but instead of growling, she lay still, trusting. The woman's face softened. "Oh, God," she whispered, kneeling beside the girl. She touched one of the pups, her rough hands gentle for once. "They're just babies." The girl's heart surged with relief. "We can help them, right?" Her mother didn't answer at first. She looked at the frail mother dog, at the ribs pressing through her skin, at the blanket the girl had given up from her own bed. Then, slowly, she nodded. "We'll try." That night, the kitchen smelled richer than it had in weeks. Her mother stirred extra broth into the pot, set aside a small bowl without comment. The girl carried it to the shed with trembling hands, feeling like the world had shifted. For the first time, she wasn't alone. But as snow deepened outside and the cold pressed harder against the walls, she knew this was only the beginning. Survival was not yet victory. They would need more, More food, more warmth, more hope. And somewhere deep inside, she feared the fight had only just begun. The blizzard hit in the dead of night, swallowing the village in a roar of white. The roof groaned under the weight of snow, windows rattled, and the wind screamed like 1,000 voices. The girl lay awake in bed, her heart pounding with every gust. She could only think of the shed, the thin boards, the cracks where the cold slid through like knives, the fragile lives huddled inside. At last, she could bear it no longer. She slipped from under her quilt and padded barefoot to her mother's side. "Mama," she whispered, trembling, "they won't survive the night." Her mother stirred, eyes heavy with exhaustion. But then she saw the fear written across her daughter's face and knew it was true. Without another word, she rose, wrapped her shawl tight, and together they braved the storm. Snow clawed at their legs, the path nearly vanished. By the time they reached the shed, their fingers were numb, their lashes heavy with frost. The girl yanked the door open, and her heart cracked. The mother dog lay collapsed, her body curled protectively around her pups. They whimpered weakly beneath her, muffled cries barely breaking through the wind. The girl fell to her knees. "Mama, help me!" Her mother moved fast, scooping up 2 squirming pups into her shawl. The girl gathered the others, pressing their tiny, shivering bodies to her chest. Last, with effort, they lifted the mother dog, weak, nearly limp, but still breathing. Together they stumbled back toward the house, driven by instinct more than strength. Inside, the kitchen became a sanctuary. The fire roared to life, casting a golden glow against the frostbitten windows. Towels were warmed, bowls of broth poured, the floor lined with blankets. The puppies squeaked and rooted, tiny mouths opening for food. The mother dog lifted her head slowly, her eyes meeting the girl's with a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude so raw it stole the girl's breath. All night, the family worked. The girl's father, woken by the chaos, at first grumbled, his anger sharp, but as he stood in the doorway, watching his wife ladle broth into a dish and his daughter cradle a trembling puppy to her chest, something inside him shifted. He saw the fragility of life laid bare, and for the first time, his voice softened. By dawn, the storm had eased. The house smelled of broth and wet fur, filled with the soft sounds of sleeping pups. The girl sat beside the fire, head resting against the mother dog's side. She could feel her breaths, steady now, the rise and fall of life pushing back against the cold. Her mother wrapped a quilt around them both, whispering, "You saved them." The girl shook her head, blinking back tears. "No, she saved them. She never gave up." Her hand rested gently on the dog's fur. "She trusted me." And in that trust, a miracle had bloomed. The weeks that followed were not easy, but they were full of light. The pups grew stronger, tumbling across the floor, chasing each other in circles. The girl laughed more than she ever had, her joy infectious. Her father still frowned at the extra mouths to feed, but his hands built a sturdier shelter, his silence a quiet form of acceptance. Spring came at last, softening the world with new green. The once ruined shed became a small haven, warm and dry, lined with blankets and bowls. The mother dog, her ribs hidden now under new strength, walked proudly beside the girl, no longer begging, no longer broken. Simply alive, simply trusted. And one afternoon, as sunlight spilled over the valley and the puppies tumbled at her feet, the girl realized the story had come full circle. What had begun as a desperate plea had turned into a bond unbreakable, a testament to the fierce, tender power of love. She pressed her cheek into the dog's fur, whispering into the wind, "You'll never be alone again." The dog closed her eyes, leaning into the girl's embrace. Around them, the world breathed, soft and alive, carrying their shared promise into forever. The valley had a way of holding memories, like the mountains themselves listened and kept them safe. In spring, the snow melted into streams that hummed through the grass, carrying with them the whispers of winter's hardships. And in that season of thawing, of fragile beginnings, the girl walked often with the dog by her side, the puppies bouncing like shadows ahead of them. It was hard to believe, sometimes, how close they had come to losing everything. The images still haunted her, the storm, the shed, the trembling bodies she'd cradled against her chest. But those images no longer carried only fear. They had transformed into reminders of what love could endure, of the strength found in desperate hope. The dog, once skeletal and broken, now carried herself with a quiet dignity. Her fur had grown thick and lustrous, her eyes clear pools of amber that met the girl's gaze without hesitation. She no longer begged, no longer flinched when a hand reached out. Instead, she leaned into the touch, her trust like a fragile flame that had finally found shelter from the wind. The villagers noticed the change too. They saw the girl, small yet determined, walking with her guardian, and they whispered with something like respect. Once, they might have scolded her father for allowing strays to stay. Now, they nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the miracle that had unfolded in plain sight. Her father himself had softened in ways subtle but undeniable. He still muttered about feed and chores, but his hands built a sturdier pen near the house, his saw biting through wood late into the evening. He grumbled as he worked, but the girl caught him more than once pausing to watch the pups wrestle in the dirt, his lips tugging upward in something almost like a smile. The girl's mother called it healing, of the land, of their home, of their hearts. She had always believed in small acts of kindness, but now she saw what those acts could grow into, how a single choice could change the shape of a life. For the girl, the bond went deeper still. Nights when the wind howled through the valley, she would curl beside the dog, her head rising and falling with each steady breath. She understood now that love was not loud or grand. It was the quiet endurance of a mother shielding her young, the desperate eyes of a creature refusing to give up. It was the promise she had whispered that night in the storm, "You'll never be alone again." The puppies grew quickly, their paws comically oversized, their curiosity endless. Each carried a piece of their mother's spirit, tumbling and tumbling until collapsing in warm heaps against the girl's legs. They would one day find new homes, perhaps in the very village that once turned away. And with them they would carry a story, of survival, of trust, of a girl who listened when others turned away. As the seasons turned, the girl found herself returning often to the shed where it had all begun. She would stand in the doorway, remembering the frailty of that night, the weight of the puppies in her arms, the sight of the mother dog's pleading eyes. It was no longer a place of sorrow. It was a place of transformation, a reminder that even in ruin hope could take root. One evening, long after the storm had passed and the memory of winter had softened, the girl sat with the dog beneath the wide sky. The mountains glowed in the fading light, their peaks brushed with gold. The puppies wrestled nearby, their barks sharp and joyful, carried by the wind. The girl leaned close, pressing her cheek against the dog's fur. "Do you remember?" she whispered, though she knew memory was not the same for them. "You were so tired, so afraid, and you still fought for them. You never gave up." The dog's ears flicked, her gaze steady as if she did remember, not with words, but with something deeper, something that had lived in her bones. She leaned closer, sighing a breath that was both contentment and answer. The girl's eyes welled, not with sorrow, but with the kind of emotion that comes when a promise has been kept. "I'll fight for you too, always." The world around them hushed as if listening, the rustle of grass, the distant cry of a hawk, the soft shuffle of paws settling into rest. In that quiet something eternal was written, a bond forged in desperation, tempered in storm, sealed in trust. Years later, when the girl was grown, she would tell the story often. She would speak of the winter storm, of the night she carried life against her chest, of the dog who taught her what resilience truly meant. Listeners would wipe their eyes, struck by the rawness of it. But to the girl, now a woman, the story was never about tears. It was about light, how it had found them in the dark, how it had guided her hand, how it had turned fear into love. And always, she ended with the same truth. She begged me for help, but really, she was the one who saved me. She taught me how to keep going when everything feels impossible. Back in that valley, in the small cabin warmed by firelight, the echoes of that winter lived on, not as shadows, but as reminders. The girl, the dog, the family, they were stitched together now, bound by something greater than circumstance. Because once, in the middle of a storm, a desperate mother dog begged a child for mercy, and the child answered. And from that moment on, neither of them would ever walk alone again.